A couple weeks ago, I hit my weekly limit on my Claude Code Max plan with 3 days left in the week. So I decided to take this as an opportunity to try out Codex. And today I want to share with you my experience on what that's been like, what's been different when using something like Codex versus Claude Code, and all of that. So let's dive in. First, let's talk about the models. When I first started using Codex, ChatGPT 5.4 was the primary model, but since then, GPT 5.5 has rolled out, and so I've ended up spending some time with both. Now, OpenAI has a few different plans that you can pick from, including a free plan with limited codex usage. You're probably not going to get much use out of it, but if you do just want to try it out and see what it's like, you can do that. I've opted for the pro plan so I could spend a lot of time working with it and diving deeply into it versus just kind of poking around. And so I wanted to share some of my immediate thoughts. So I've talked with a couple friends of mine about this, and it was a little bit hard to kind of articulate what the experience was like without being kind of hand wavy about it. And really, the simplest way I can put it is that everything I've thrown at Codex has just been really strong across a wide range of tasks. It felt like it can really kind of dive into the nitty gritty of all of the details. The first thing I tried to do was actually send it into Emma's code base, and that was with GPT 5.4. So I asked it to do kind of a comprehensive review of everything in the system, finding gaps, missing tests, type checking issues, all of that. And it ran for a little bit, scouring through the code base. And when it came back, it actually had found a pretty long list of prioritized things that were worth looking into that Claude Code hadn't done. Some of the suggestions were structural, others were test related, and getting better test posture, whether it was evals, things like that. So overall, the review felt directionally right. It wasn't just necessarily verbose output for the sake of output, and the suggestions actually looked pretty workable and the kind of work I'd actually want to do to harden the system. Sometimes when I send Opus at it, it feels like it just finds things for the sake of finding things, and then it's kind of just moving things around. So the next thing I did after I had to actually work through that was having it a feature. And so the thing I've noticed is that I can give it a little bit more of a vague kind of feature description compared to something like Claude Code with Opus. And it felt like it gave a pretty solid implementation of the feature. I know that recently with Opus 4.7, it actually is known that it doesn't work as well with vague prompts, but this in GPT 5.5 really felt like it rounded out to the edges. So that's been kind of my high level experience with using Codex. Now let's walk through what that means for a user. So, what does it look like to actually implement or start using Codex if you're a Claude Code user? Codex supports a few different ways to use it. It has a desktop app, which is quite nice, a CLI, and of course in the cloud as well. Now, I've found for a while now, because I've tried Codex a couple times in the past, the Codex app for macOS is quite nice. I'd say I've enjoyed it better than the Claude Code one. Even though recently Claude Anthropic released a new version, I still think the Codex one is a bit sharper to use. I still like to use the terminal for most of my work, so that's where I've been spending most of my time. So when we go through it, that is what you will see. So let's dive into a code base that I haven't actually taken a lot of time to prepare to use Codex and see what it's like. So here we are in Creator Signal, a project I've been working on and been doing on live streams. It's a application for doing YouTube research, and I've been primarily driving through it with Claude Code. And so I figured we could use this to kind of walk through what it would be like to potentially move to something like Codex instead. Now, one of the first things that you need to think about is if you've already been using something like Claude Code instead, then getting some of the conventions over to make your agent or codex to be ready to use it. And so one of the things for something like Claude Code is that it depends on a Claude.md file. And so you can see here, I've gone ahead and actually already prepared for something like this by extracting out instead what is called an agents.md. So the agents.md is essentially a standard that has been going around for standardizing how to set up these instruction files for an agent. And unfortunately, Claude doesn't follow it. They use still the Claude.md instead. So Codex is one of the agents that uses the agents.md. There are several others, and it is what I kind of tend to default to now in projects. So One of the ways to help kind of keep those in line with one another is you can either do two things. You can symlink, say your agents.md to a Claude.md file, and that works well. If you are on an environment where you can't support symlinks, then you have an alternative. So what I've done instead in that case, this is an example of it, is in my Claude MD file, I use the at reference to at the agents.md. So what that means is when you have the at symbol there, is actually going to pull the contents into this file when it's reading it, so it pulls it in, as opposed to just a reference without it, where it's just kind of like pointing and instructing Claude to look for it. So that's just another way you can actually have this work instead. But I typically go with the Symlink route instead because it's a bit simpler, Git supports it, and things like that. One of the other common configuration points is going to be agent skills. So with Claude Code, it looks for skills in the .claude/skills folder. In the case of something like Codex, it uses a more standardized version of .agents/skills instead. Having to maintain those or keep track of those, it can be painful if you're trying to work maybe potentially with teammates who have, some of you use Codex, some of you use Claude Code, or maybe sometimes you switch between the two. Can be difficult, but Vercel has provided an API or a command line tool that you can use to actually handle this process. So I'm going to go ahead and demo that with my Claude Code workflows repo. Now, all of the plugins inside of my Claude Code workflows are set up so that if they are just an agent skill, they have instructions to use the npx skills add command instead. So let's go ahead and pull in the TDD workflow inside of here instead. So if we go back to the terminal, I'm going to go ahead and paste this in. And what's going to happen is it's going to run. Yes, I wanted to install the package. And you can see we're given an option to install the skills. So by default, it's going to use always included in .agent/skills. And so we can see here a list of the different tools or applications, agents that will use this. So AMP, anti-gravity, Klein, Codex, Cursor, etc. They all support .agent/skills. And if we go down, we can see we have options to install for other agents. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Claude Code because sometimes I use Claude Code and sometimes I use Codex. So if I go ahead and hit enter now, we are given another option. So we can choose the installation scope. We can choose project or global. So in this case, I want it to be in a project. And then lastly, the recommended installation method is going to be Symlink. So what's going to happen is it's going to install that. Let's go ahead and say yes. And if we look inside of agent skills, now we have the TDD workflow. And then the other thing, if we look inside of Claude skills, that it is there as well. And so .claude, if we take a look, we can see that the TDD workflow is now symlinked to the agent skills. So again, the common pattern to use symlinking to kind of abstract between them. Using Vercel CLI, we can easily install skills to work across different types of agents. So now let's go ahead and start up Codex and walk through it. So I'm going to go ahead and trust this. So right now I have GPT 5.5 and it's on high, which is probably not necessary. So if I do /model, that's where I can choose which model I'm running. So I can go back to 5.4 if I don't feel like I need the strongest complexity, or I can choose 5.5, 5.4 mini, 5.3 codex, and things like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually choose 5.4 for now because I'm not really working on anything too crazy. And now I can select my reasoning level. So by default, it's gonna go to medium, which is a balance for speed and reasoning depth for everyday tasks. Otherwise, you can go to high, which gives you greater depth for complex problems. So again, not really going to be doing anything too complicated. So I'm going to leave it on medium, but depending on the type of work you're doing, you're going to want to choose the reasoning level necessary. So for me, extra high is going to be when I'm really working through something really complex or I really don't know how to think through it. And then I'll use extra high. Then I can switch to high for just say, maybe some moderately complex problems, or medium for kind of like the standard everyday kind of task. And so sometimes within a feature or a project that you're working on, you might toggle between them. So like to start, you might start early with extra high to really kind of get the ball rolling. Then as you're iterating through, you might then toggle down to medium or high from there to kind of improve your speed as well as your token usage. Now, the other thing that I like to do is so we can do /permissions to choose what it can do. So by default, Codex is going to be able to read and write edit files inside of your current workspace. run commands, and require approval to access the internet or edit files outside of the sandbox that it's in. This can sometimes lead to having to approve a bunch of things when you're working. And so for me, I like to run in auto review. So auto review will let you do same workspace write permissions as a default. On request approvals are routed through an auto reviewer subagent. So this is similar to the recently released feature by Anthropic for Claude Code, where it passes it to an LLMS judge to look at the permission that it's looking to do, and the LMS judge will choose to approve or disapprove it. So this is the version I like to use. Now, full access is where it can just access anything, and I don't necessarily recommend that. That's a little bit dangerous, but it is available if you need it. There's also been a recently released experimental feature for /goal. This is like a built-in Ralph Wiggum loop for using Codex. So if you're not familiar with the Ralph Wiggum loop, it's essentially a way to autonomously let the Codex agent just work through a complicated problem on its own with guardrails for how to understand whether it's complete or verify its work. So if you have a test suite or things like that, and you have a complicated or long running feature that you just want to let Codex kind of go tackle on its own, you can definitely go ahead and do that by /goal. So you can be, here's a high level objective that I want to do. I've seen people using this to kind of like tune local LLMs to say on a DGX Spark, or say, run after this problem, potentially maybe a linear project or some larger scoped set of work, and have it run /goal with that in mind, and it will just kind of iterate on its own until it's done. And so this has been something where it's been super useful to have for specific use cases like that. And I've really seen Codex work really well for, say, 5.5 and on to just tackle long running problems. So I can give it a problem that I wanted to look into, build against, and see it running for 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe over a few hours, and it will just kind of keep going until it's done on its own, which has been really useful. A couple other features that I've been finding useful with Codex is the built-in code review feature. So you can actually set up Codex to do PR reviews and things like that on a GitHub repo, and it works quite well. Codex also has a pretty good cloud environment. So Claude Code also has one. I've not found its experience to be that great. I feel like it's been a little bit limited in configuring how it operates and things like that. And it doesn't have all of the work streams that Codex has. So there's linear, which has linear agents, where you can actually tag an agent and it will kind of like pick up the work and work on it on its own. This has been supported for things like Codex, Devin, GitHub Copilot, but for whatever reason, Anthropic Claude Code has not been supported, and that has been something that I've enjoyed. So when you're using something like linear agents, you can actually basically assign an issue to Codex, and you can see actually the interaction inside of linear of what it's doing and get that feedback inside of there. So it's pretty nice as another way to kind of like delegate issues to Codex in the cloud. So that's been my experience so far. For the past 2 weeks, it's been my default tool while developing Emma. And at least for now, I don't really see myself switching off of it. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm done using Claude Code. I'm still using it every day for my work at August Health, and I still reach for it for kind of like my knowledge work inside of my Obsidian Vault and other creative things like that. So things like writing, I'm still using Claude Code for, and using it for inside of my Obsidian Vault. So that's kind of the split I've been using. But for my personal kind of day-to-day software development, Codex has been my go-to as of late. So probably things will change over time, but I just wanted to share my experience using Codex instead of Claude Code. And if you have any questions, I'm curious if you started using Codex, or are you using any other tools, or are you primarily using Claude Code? Leave a comment and let me know what you're using, or if you'd like to learn more about how to use one over the other. And if you found this useful and you want more content like it, I publish a weekly newsletter about how I use AI as a software engineer and what I'm learning while building agentic applications. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.